All right, welcome. This is my second video on the endocrine system. The last video went about talking about the HPA axis, right? So we went from the hypothalamus releasing CRH, which caused the anterior pituitary to release ACTH, which caused the adrenal cortex to release glucocorticoids. And we also said that these glucocorticoids can go ahead and stimulate the adrenal medulla to release catecholamines. Well, not all of them, so I guess let's be specific, to release norepinephrine and epinephrine. We also talked about how these glucocorticoids themselves can cause the effects of stress, right? So these glucocorticoids can increase your heart rate, dilate your blood vessels that supply your fight and flight responses, but constrict the vessels that supply your rest and digest system. Cool. So we talked about how the glucocorticoids are direct hormones, and how all of these guys, CRH and ACTH, are tropic hormones. Okay, cool. So then I also mentioned that the adrenal cortex also releases something called mineralocorticoids, or mineralocorticoids, I guess. But I didn't talk about it because this really isn't in the control of ACTH. It's not really in the control of the HPA axis at all. There are some aspects of it that is, but as far as the MCAT goes, it's not really in the control of the HPA axis. So mineralocorticoids, their primary function is not really stress, but rather salt and water homeostasis. Right, so mineralocorticoids, specifically what we are going to talk about is aldosterone. Aldosterone really cares about the water and salt ratio in your blood. And that's what aldosterone really acts on. Okay, so what does it do? Why does it do it? What happens, right? So first of all, aldosterone's usually released, its primary function is to increase your blood pressure. Now let's think, how can we increase the blood pressure, right? The easiest way for our body to do that is to actually increase the blood volume. All right, so how do we increase the blood volume? Do we just produce a lot more red blood cells? What do we do? Well, in order to keep everything normal and not screw up our body, the best way to increase your blood volume is going to be to increase the amount of water. Like literally just increase everything, right? Like increase the amount of water. Okay, but now if we just increase the amount of water, well, you might be thinking, okay, then this blood is going to become super hypotonic, right? So the real solution that our body comes up with is to increase sodium reabsorption. So what's happening is in your kidneys, there's this organ, or not an organ, there's this part in your kidneys called the distal convoluted tubule. So we'll talk about this in a different video altogether, or you'll get to this chapter at a different time. But your kidneys have this thing called a nephron. So you have your proximal convoluted tubule. You're going to go down and you're going to go up. And you're going to go into your distal convoluted tubule. Okay. And then So this thing that I just drew is called the nephron, and it's part of your kidneys. And in each of these little like tubes, right, um, the body is reabsorbing minerals, water, anything that it needs to maintain homeostasis at the end of the day. So as you pee out, right, like you have blood here, your body's going to take in a bunch of things that it thinks needs to be peed out, right? So all of this, so your urine's going to be in here. And then as it travels through this, right, your body slowly takes out things that it deems necessary. So like water is going to go out. And then at some point, right, like salt is going to go out. The thing is though, right? The thing is, in most cases, where sodium goes, water goes. So this is going to be kind of a tagline that'll help you through both this unit or this section and also the urine formation or elimination section. So like the nephrons, the kidney, that kind of stuff. So where sodium goes, water goes. Okay, and the reason for this is because your body wants to maintain the tonicity, right? And for those of you who are a little confused on what tonicity means, tonicity just means the like solute concentration. Right. So your body wants to maintain the solute concentration, right? So if it increases the amount of sodium, then it also wants to increase the amount of water, right? So essentially what aldosterone does to increase the blood pressure, right, is it increases the blood volume by increasing the amount of water, but the way that it increases the amount of water is by increasing the amount of sodium. So it takes in a bunch of sodium, and then when the sodium leaves, the water kind of follows, right? So then water is going to follow out into the blood. So now you have a lot more water in the blood. So you have a lot more blood at the end of the day. So think about it, right? Like if your blood is going to be super watery, it's going to feel like there's a lot more blood there, right? So that's going to increase the pressure against the walls. Okay, so how does this happen? Well, we said that aldosterone is released to increase blood pressure. So likely, it's probably going to be released when your blood pressure is low, right? How do we know that the blood pressure is low? That's actually another place where the kidney really, really comes into play here. Let me zoom out a little bit so this does sound super important. Okay. So near this little tuft of cells, this tuft of capillaries, right? So this scribble that I drew there earlier, that's a bunch of capillaries, and the tuft is called a glomerulus. Let me give myself a little bit more room. So that tuft is called a glomerulus. Near this tuft, right, near the glomerulus, are these cells called, what is going on? Okay, near the glomerulus are these cells called juxtaglomerular cells. Now, if you have a little bit of Latin under your belt, this is going to sound pretty self-explanatory. So, juxta means near, right? Glomerular, glomerulus, and cells. So they're just cells that are near the glomerulus. These juxtaglomerular cells, so these juxtaglomerular cells act as baroreceptors. Baroreceptors. What do those mean? Okay. The root baro means pressure. You can kind of remember this in terms of like as a barometer, right? A barometer is that thing in physics. So you have a little bit of mercury there, and it tells you how much pressure. Oh, I just realized I'm not writing that. Okay, there you go. So this juxtaglomerular cells, right, they act as baroreceptors. right, okay, so the prefix baro, this means pressure, and you can kind of remember it as a barometer, which measures pressure. Now, they're not exactly receptors per se. They're more of like pressure sensors. So these juxtaglomerular cells act as pressure sensors. And when the pressure is low, right? When the blood pressure is low, and the way it notices that is because so the pressure against these walls is gonna decrease, right? So when the pressure is low, so the hydrostatic pressure is low, they're going to secrete something called renin. Renin is an enzyme. Okay. So when the pressure is low, they're going to secrete renin. What does renin do? So what renin does is there's a zymogen. So a zymogen, which is an enzyme precursor, right, called angiotensinogen. The way that I know that this is a zymogen is not because I memorized that, but because this precursor, or this suffix, ogen, usually tells me that it's a zymogen. Like fibrinogen, I don't think tensin, I think thrombinogen, something like that, right? A zymogen is essentially just an enzyme precursor. Okay. So renin is a zymogen. Can I change this color? Refine. Oh, okay. There we go. Oh, sure. Oh my God. Okay, great. All right. Renin is the enzyme that cleaves angiotensinogen to make it angiotensin 1. Okay, so essentially, right, where we're at right now is there's low pressure, the blood pressure is low, so it's exerting less pressure against the walls of the capillaries, right? And your juxtaglomerular cells are secreting renin. Renin is now in the blood, right? When you say secrete, it's going to secrete it into the blood. Yeah, okay. So renin is in the blood. Now renin converts an enzyme called angiotensinogen, right? So angiotensinogen, by the way, is present in the plasma. So the plasma is part of the blood, right? So once renin is secreted into the blood, the angiotensinogen becomes angiotensin, right? So angiotensinogen becomes angiotensin 1. Now, your blood, which has angiotensin 1, is going through your bloodstream, right? And when it reaches the lungs, right, there is an enzyme called the ACE enzyme, or just ACE, right? And this is in the lungs, which is really, really weird to think about. Okay. ACE stands for angiotensin converting enzyme. Now, if you're on a blood pressure medication, or you know someone who's on a blood pressure medication, you might have heard of the term ACE inhibitor. This is the enzyme that those are inhibiting. Famous ACE inhibitors, actually before I lie, I'm gonna look it up. The Prils, okay. So famous ACE inhibitors, right? Like if you work anywhere in the healthcare thing, you've probably, or you have family, probably heard of lisinopril, right? Um, really, anything that ends with a pril is usually an ACE inhibitor. So this is the enzyme that these guys inhibit, right? So if we think through the mechanism, right, if ACE is inhibited, then angiotensin 1 never becomes angiotensin 2, right? So your like pathway, like this entire pathway of creating aldosterone is already stopped over here. So the desired effects never really happen, or the desired effects of angiotensinogen and renin and all of that never happens. So ACE then effectively inhibits a hormone that increases the blood pressure, right? Okay. Now, why do we have to inhibit it right here? Like, why not later? One of the reasons is actually because angiotensin 2 itself can start creating the desired effects. So one of those is increasing the blood pressure, right? Like it can just increase the blood pressure by vasoconstriction. And increased heart rate, right? So, but when the heart rate increases, right? So, this is, I think, later if you're going by Kaplan. I'm pretty sure this this equation is presented to you later, but the cardiac output. So this is how much blood is. So the cardiac output is going to be equal to HR times stroke volume. Now, stroke volume stays the same. So this is the amount of like blood per stroke, per heart stroke. But heart rate increases, right? So if a heart rate increases, then your cardiac output increases as well. Now, if the cardiac output increases, the total volume of the blood increases. And on top of that, right, the vessels themselves constrict. So now, instead of you having this really big tube with like, I don't know, like this amount of blood, you now have a thinner tube with a lot more blood, right? And these guys are going to exert a higher pressure against the walls. Okay, so that's one way that this whole pathway is able to increase your blood pressure. But we're not done yet, right? Like I told you that this is the aldosterone pathway and we haven't gotten to aldosterone. So what happens next? Okay, so angiotensin 2 then stimulates the adrenal cortex. So we're finally getting to the cortical part of this, right? So it stimulates the adrenal cortex. And the adrenal cortex releases aldosterone. Right? It releases aldosterone. And what aldosterone does is the effects that we talked about over here. So aldosterone increases sodium reabsorption. In the distal convoluted tubule. And that then increases water reabsorption, which in turn increases the plasma volume. Which then increases the cardiac output, right? So if the plasma volume is higher, the cardiac output is higher, which then increases the blood pressure. So that is how the aldosterone pathway works.